Okay, so Rabban Gamliel cites several cases in support of his claim, such as the burning of the fats and limbs on this altar. So here we're back at like very priestly based things. I'm gonna kind of maybe scroll through this a little bit to get to the good stuff. Okay, so this is all Mishnah. This is all stuff from the, okay, fine. From the like 1st and 2nd century. Now we get to the Gemara, the commentary from the Babylonian sages from a couple hundred years later. So this here, that's the sign that it's Gemara. So Tana, it was taught, Hecha ka'e dekatane me'ematai. Okay, so now we're in the Aramaic. Whoa. So it was taught, but what does it mean, me'ematai? What were the sages of the Mishnah even really asking? How do we know what they're talking about? And in the time of the Gemara, the recitation of the Shema is already very fixed. So they want to kind of go back and like trace the origins of it. Vitu. My Shana Ditane Be'aravit. We've switched from Aravin to Arvit. Beresha. Litnei Deshacharit. Beresha. What distinguishes the evening Shema from that it was taught first? Like why are we starting with how late in the evening you could say the Shema and not about the morning Shema? So now the Gemara is like, let's go back and talk about the morning Shema. And kind of, we'll talk through our day a little bit. But the Gemara says no. The Tana, the Mishnaic rabbis, knew what they were doing because the Torah says when you lie down and when you rise up. That's how a Jewish day goes. It starts at sundown. So that's why we start with the evening. And so based on that, the Tana teaches the oral law still passed down from Moses, that the time for the recitation of the Shema of lying down is commanded from the Torah, and it coincides with when the priests enter to partake of their truma. Okay. However, another possible explanation for why the Mishnah opens with the evening Shema rather than the morning Shema. If be'et ema, as you wish, ya'alef mibriaito shel olam, that you could say that it derives the precedence of the evening Shema from the order of the creation of the world. There are so many words that are not in the Hebrew here, but that like the Hebrew would not make any sense without. But Breito, like Bereshit, no, that doesn't work. Anyway, Breito means the creation of the world. So that the evening, or the creation story also tells us, Vayhi erev vayhi voker yom echad, there was evening and there was morning one day. So again, we know that the Jewish day starts in the evening. And you can see now, like, how the Talmud works, that, like, we're getting further and further away from the question of the Shema now. Now we're just talking about, like, how do we know that the day starts in the evening? Ihafi sefa detanya b'shachar mevarach shtayim lefaneha be'achat le'acharecha be'erev mevarech shtayim lefaneha u'shtayim le'acharecha. This is, so you see, obviously, this is a quote. So if the latter, if, you know, based on this creation verse, Why does the latter clause of the Mishnah, which appears later in this chapter, teach that in the morning one recites 2 blessings for the Shema and 1 blessing afterward, but in the evening one recites 2 blessings before the Shema and 2 afterward? So this is the quote, what the quotations are specifically from that later Mishnah, or not a later Mishnah, a Mishnah that will get dissected more fully later in this Talmud. Litnei Aravit Beresha. So, like, based on that reasoning, the Mishnah should have taught the blessing recited before and after the evening Shema first. Because the other Mishnah goes in that order. I'm not really sure what they're saying here, to be honest. In the morning, one recites 2 blessings, and in the evening, based on the above reasoning, the Mishnah, that the later Mishnah, this one, should still go in that order. So why does this quotation say morning first? Tana patach ba'aravit. Indeed, the Tana began by discussing the laws of the recitation of the evening Shema, the Hadar, Taneh b'shacharit, and then continued on the morning. So it's the same Tana. He started with the evening and then the morning, but then once we dealt with when you can say the Shema, then he went back and talked about the blessings. So it's okay that he talks about the blessings for the morning Shema first, because we already established that evening Shema comes first, and we're backtracking a little bit. You go back the way you came, so via the morning. Amar Mar, the master. Who knows who that is? Mar is like Mr. I mean, it literally is just the title. He's missing a name here. Nisha'a shehakohanim nichnasim le'echol betrumatam. Okay, so now we're back to this question of what does it mean that the earliest you can say the evening Shema is at the time that the priests partake of their truma? There are no more priests, so the Gemara says, like, so what time is that actually? And they kind of know, like, even in the Gemara, this is another couple hundred years, another couple hundred miles east. Like, they're further from the temple, but that, like, that tradition is still pretty alive for them, like at least the oral tradition of like what temple life meant to them. So like they're asking this as a pedagogical question, really, more than an actual question. So when do they enter to partake of their truma? From the time of the emergence of the stars. There you go, Terry. It doesn't say 3, but when the stars come out. And if that is the case, let the Tana teach that the time for the recitation of the evening Shema is from the time of the emergence of the stars. So if that's true, that the Truma happens when the stars come out, why didn't the sage just say you can start saying the Shema when the stars come out? Why obfuscate it with this layer about the priests?
Right.
By the way, also this use of the word Tana. So Tana, it's a little bit. I think I mentioned last time this thing about the Stam, and sometimes there's a Stam Mishnah. Who's a little different than the Stam in the Gemara, and that it probably was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So that's what they mean by the Tana. They're just talking about this Mishnaic rabbi who didn't get a name. The anonymous voice of the Mishnah is the Tana. And so from this, we also say that first layer of rabbis are known as the Tanaim. Like everyone from the Mishnah is a Tana. But here they mean specifically the anonymous voice of it's like an abstract abstractification. I don't know if that's a word, but of the Mishnah teacher. Okay, so why didn't we just say you start saying the Shema when the stars come out? The Tana teaches us Agra or Che Kamash Malan. That in another, so the Tana teaches us another matter in passing. Okay, sure. So when do the priests partake of their truma? When from the emergence of the stars. So the Tana did this on purpose to keep it to keep that time of the truma relevant, even when there was no more truma. That you should remember that they came out to take their truma when the stars came out, and that this was relevant and important even when there's no more truma, no more priest. Well, I mean, they're still kohanim, but they don't have a job. So, and from here, the Tana teaches that failure to bring an atonement offering does not prevent a priest from eating truma. Excuse me. So this was a time for everyone. Oh, there's so much words here that are not in the Hebrew now. Okay, so that's all of this. The time of the truma. And then, in cases where an impure priest is required to immerse himself in a ritual bath and bring an atonement offering, even if he already immersed himself, he is not completely ritual pure until he brings the atonement offering. Nevertheless, he is still permitted to partake of truma. Taught in passing in our Mishnah, this is articulated fully in a Baraita based on a close reading of the biblical passages. So a Baraita is material from the same time period as the Mishnah that for whatever reason didn't make it into the Mishnah. And so it's hard to, as far as I know, there's no way to find like a compilation of Braita. You can only find them in the places that they're mentioned in the Gemara, where they've like been passed down orally and then recorded as part of the broader arguments. But they were never like codified in the same way that I guess that's sort of the point, is that they're the edited pieces. But when everything was an oral tradition, it's hard to edit out like people's memories. So the rabbis of the Gemara will still quote them. So Ki Tanya, it was as it says in the Baraita. Oh no. Yeah. Uva Hashemesh v'taher. And the sun, oh God, okay. One who touches something impure remains impure until evening. He should not eat of the consecrated items, and he must wash his flesh with water. And the sun sets, and it or he is purified. Afterwards, he might eat from the truma, for it is his bread. And that is the passage from Leviticus. The sun sets and it is purified. That the absence of the setting of his sun prevents him from partaking of the truma, but failure to bring atonement offering does not prevent him from the partaking of truma. So we're getting like further and further away from the Shema again, but it's the pedagogical cycles we're going through here. Like, we don't want to forget about the truma. We're capturing all of these pieces, and it's still sort of about how it's like you can see where these tangents are related, that we're still kind of talking about evening and morning, times of day, how time was broken up for them because they didn't have clocks, etc. Umimai, some phrases in Aramaic just have a good ring to them. Umimai, and how do we know? Dahai uva hashemesh, that the phrase "and the sun sets," Bi'et hashemesh refers to the complete setting of the sun. I guess as opposed to like, does it mean that when the sun is all the way down, or it means when the sun has hit the horizon, right? Like, how do we calculate sunset? V'taher, and how do we know that, like, then that it is purified, or refers to the fact that the day is pure, rather than that the person is pure or whatever. Okay, that's folio 1, or that's side 1, I guess. Next side, this is still considered one daf. Perhaps the expression, and the sun sets and it is purified, refers to the beginning of sunset. Be'et orohu, the setting of the sun's light. So according to that explanation, umay hataher, what does this mean? That it was purified? Tahar gavra, the person will become purified. In context, like in the Braita, and just especially in the Leviticus, like that's obvious, but they want to make sure you understand that, because they've done these other mental gymnastics to be like, oh, maybe it means the day, maybe it means the truma, maybe it means whatever. No, the person who was impure, now they are pure. Amar Rabbah bar Rav Shela says, Im Kain, okay, sure. Then, so if it is purified, that means that the priest goes and purifies himself. Okay, so we're together on that verse. Le makara. So then why didn't the verse say, vitaher my vitaher? That like he will become purified. Let it be unambiguous. My vitaher. What is the meaning of this expression? And it is purified. This like passive, and it instead of he, whatever. Okay. Taher Yoma. It means the day is pure. Ki de Amri inashe, as the people say, I arav shimsha ve'idaki yoma. The sun has set and the day is purified. You know how people say that. Ma'arava, in the west, that is to say, in the land of Israel, right? Because these rabbis are writing in Babylonia or Persia, whatever. Had Rabbah bar Rav Shela la Shemia lehu. They did not hear this explanation given by Rabbah bar Rav Shela. So they did not know this this tradition or this explanation. So they raise a different dilemma. So the expression uva hashemesh, the sun sets, does that actually refer to the setting of the sun? And if so, does it mean that it is purified? Does that mean the day clears away? Or perhaps it refers to the setting of its light at sunset, in which case, what is the meaning of and it is purified? So in Eretz Israel, they explain this to say it refers to the purification of the person. So we're back to that. We're going back and forth. Does it mean the purification of the day or the purification of the person? V'hadar pashtula mibraita. Ultimately, they resolved this dilemma from a braita. This is how you know this is like, or not, this is how you know this is why this is one of the entry points, because the dilemma is actually resolved. So much of Talmud, they just keep going, and then like it ends, and you're like, what happened to that conversation? They just drop it. So, okay, we've resolved it. The Baraita says that the time for the recitation of the evening Shema corresponds to the time when priests are permitted to eat of their truma, the sign for which is the emergence of the stars. Seit HaKochadim, the stars come out. Therefore, we derive from here, mina, that the sun sets refers to complete sunset. And the expression it is purified means the day clears away, as the sages in Babylonia concluded. So like that's definitely not what it means in Leviticus, but we're gonna say that's what it means because it helps us here determine the end of the day and the Shema. And this is sort of what I was saying last week, Debbie, about like commentary on the Torah. They're taking like they're arriving at the answers that they want to arrive at that like make sense for their current situation and practice, and then they're pulling the verses from the Torah that help them and like retrofitting them. So there's lots of Torah being commented on in Talmud, but that's like not their starting point here. Amar Mar, Mr. comes back. From the time of the beginning of the time for the recitation of the evening Shema is from the time when the priests enter to partake of their truma, and the Gemara raises a contradiction to this opinion from a Baraita that states that the time for the recitation of the evening Shema is from when a poor person enters to eat his bread with salt until he rises from his meal. So there's a tradition, you still see this often, to dip your challah in salt, because it has to do with well, there's a few explanations, but it could come from here. A poor person enters to eat his bread with salt because he didn't have access to like other spices or much other food. But again, like, what does that mean? Okay, so the Gemara begins its analysis by clarifying whether there is an actual contradiction here, or whether different expressions are being employed to describe the same time. Seifa, so they say here the latter clause, but usually it's like, I mean, literally means the end. Like, there's more to this Braita that you didn't say, that like you're picking and choosing parts of this verse to pretend that there's a question here that there's not really there. The end of the Braita says, certainly it disagrees with the Mishnah that the poor person clearly does not continue eating until the end of first watch. They don't have that much food. So this Braita contradicts our Mishnah. The first clause of the Braita, which establishes the beginning of the time for the recitation of the evening Shema, does that disagree with our Mishnah? No, of course not. The time that the poor person sits down to eat their bread with salt and the time that the priest goes to eat their truma are the same time, when the stars come out. It's dinner time. It's dinner time for everybody, whether you're eating holy leftovers or pita, you know? Okay. Urminhu, another contradiction. Tosefta is I guess that's a collection of Braita, you could say. It's another book of teachings from the Mishnaic times that's like slightly less, it's not given the same weight as the Mishnah, but that's, I don't know, maybe kind of arbitrary because it's a lot of the same rabbis. Me'ematai, there's our question again. So how early can one begin to recite the Shema in the evening? From the time people enter to eat their bread on Shabbos. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Where is he? There he is. Okay. Oh, I skipped a lot. No, I didn't. Wait. Yeah. Okay, from the time that they enter to eat their bread on Shabbos. Their pita. Literally. So that's what Rabbi Meir says. Again, it's the same time, but like, okay, fine. That's how Rabbi Meir describes it. So the rabbis say from the time when the priests are eligible to partake of their truma, a sign for which is the emergence of the stars, and although there is no explicit proof that the emergence of the stars is the time when one may recite the evening Shema, there is an allusion in the book of Nehemiah to the fact that the emergence of stars is generally considered the beginning of the night. Shene'emar, that's like a key phrase that means they're about to quote Tanakh. Shene'emar, ve'anachnu osim b'malacha v'chatziam machazikim b'ramatichim me'alot hashachar ad set hakochavim. So that's the quote from Nehemiah. When we perform work and half of them grasp their spears from dawn until the emergence of stars. So that's the day, from dawn to star time. The Omer, and it says, so it's in the continuation of the verse, or the next verse, I guess, that in the night they may be a guard to us, and they may labor in the day. I'm actually sort of surprised that they even break up that quote. Often, even, it would be like implied, like they would have Shana Amar and like give half the verse, and then there would be like an ellipses or like something. V'chuli is a term that means like etc. That like the people who are studying this know the Tanakh. Like you don't need to give the whole verse, and you certainly don't need to say like, and then it says like, and then give a second verse. Like they know the context. So this must, again, this is like, because we're in beginner territory that they give you this much. My the Omer. So what does that even mean? What if the Gemara itself says like, why did you add that extra explanation of it's the same verse, or like they're a continuation. I'd already said all you needed to say. Why did you bring the second verse, and why did you specify that it was a second verse like this? So the Gemara says like, well, the first verse wasn't that clear. If you say that the night begins when the sun sets, but the workers stayed late and arrived early, that maybe their task is so important that they worked even into the night. So in anticipation of this objection, the second verse says, in the night, one may be a guard to us and may labor in the day. So we're being very clear that the work is done at the emergence of stars. That's it. Tashma, common here. That's a common phrase too in Gemara of like, okay, we're gonna resolve this dilemma. Come here, Tashma. I've got the answer. Okay, so in analyzing these three opinions of the beginning of the period for the recitation of the
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Airbnb Wi-Fi, you know. Okay.
Oh, are you in an Airbnb?
Yeah.
Ah,
Okay, so where were we? Okay, so we've been talking about three different opinions, but they're really all the same opinion. But okay, different ways to describe what time is dinner time at the end of the day that you can start saying the Shema. And then it says, well, they're the same time. So what do you mean there's three opinions? What are the rabbis even arguing about? They're all saying the same thing in different ways. Ela, well, maybe it's not so clear. Learn from this, Shema Mina, that there is a separate time for the poor person and a separate time for the priest. However, this conclusion is based on the assumption that the time of the poor person and the time of people generally are the same. But that too can be rejected with the assertion because no. The time of the poor person and people, the priest, I don't know why it says people here. I'm at the wrong part. That's why. The time of the poor person and the priest are not the same, and the time of the poor person and the general Bnei Adam, of like people in the world, are also not the same. Accordingly, the opinion expressed by the Tana and our Baraita is identical to that of the other Tanaim, and only Rabbi Meir disagrees with them. Sometimes when you do Gemara or do Talmud, it's good to keep a chart of who said what. So let's just go back and remember. Rabbi Meir said, that the time is the general time of when normal people go and take their bread. So his time is slightly different than the priests and the poor people. We don't know what time that is, though. He doesn't specify if that has to do with the emergence of stars. Although one would think, right? It's Shabbat, so okay.
Well, it should all be covered because they said you could say it pretty much from star time to morning time.
Right. So I guess the question is then, do the general people eat their Shabbat meal before the stars come out? Maybe. Maybe that's what Rabbi Meir is saying. No?
I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just laughing. You got a rule, just stay with the rule. That's for everybody.
That's true, right?
Let's just say my Talmud would be very short.
But that's sort of the fun of it, right? That it's so,
Yeah.
There's so much here.
So
It gives us our baseline for, I don't know, for arguing, for knowing how to wrestle with tradition. There is no hard and fast rule for anything ever.
I have a little story yesterday. This is about related to Manassas therapy dogs. This man came with his 2 therapy dogs to go to a library, pause for reading is what they call it. Well, he left one dog in his truck and brought one in, and then the dog in the truck was barking. It was an open truck, barking. And then he brought the dog that he had in the library back to the truck and took the other dog. So everybody was upset because the dogs are barking, the librarians were unhappy. And this one person who's on the board said, the rule is once you get into like the parking lot, then you have to follow the rules. So I thought of this, I responded, well, if the dog didn't have his vest on, was he really then acting as a therapy dog? And was it okay? So you see, I do understand.
He was out of uniform. It doesn't
That's
count.
right. So he was just a dog barking in a truck.
As they will do.
Yeah.
But I would think that people were mostly upset because the dog was in the truck and not and it's June. I mean, I know it wasn't hot yesterday, but
Yeah, it wasn't hot, but they were very upset because the dog was, and he had the tailgate down and the dog was,
in the back, not in the cab.
Yeah, exactly. So I think people, they were genuinely concerned.
But so since it's almost 2:00,
Yeah.
If we were to get further into this, does it talk about why the Shema is said so often, so many times, as opposed to just when it is said?
No, because that's taken as a given, because the Torah says when you lie down and when you rise up, you recite these words.
Okay.
So, I mean, we could get into like the question, like I said earlier, about does that verse in the Torah refer to Torah writ large, or does it refer to these words, like the immediately preceding words in that verse or in that paragraph? But here they're at a point where they're like, okay, we don't have sacrifices anymore. We need prayer. Let's start with what we know. The Shema are like these key words. We know them. They're part of our tradition. And it says, you shall speak these words when you lie down and when you rise up. So we're just kind of starting there as like, that's the given. And probably like, I mean, not probably, like definitely, people were already reciting the Shema as prayer at this time, and they are seeking to codify the like time frames. So there's no question of why. It's just when, And how do we know?
Okay.
Because that you do it is the law.
Yes, right.
I mean, because some of this, like, I'm trying to think of an example of what we've covered today. Okay, when it said, well, why don't we just say when the stars arrive, why do we refer back to the priest doing Terumen? It was because it's important to remember
Right.
the reason behind it. And I totally, yeah, I can see that. So the same question, yes, it says, say the Shema, but what are the reasons behind it would be, you would think that they would cover that, why did the Torah tell us to say it? What is in the Shema that is so very important that we need to say it in the morning and the evening and in betweens? And I mean, so they've chose, and I'm not arguing, I don't need, you know what I'm saying? It just
Yeah.
seems like, it
No,
seems
they're-
like it would be a more useful, I understand the codification and how important that is. I don't have a problem with that either, because it sort of, it sanctifies things. It definitely sanctifies things when you know why and when and how. Yeah.
Yeah, not that I recall. We don't get super into. I mean, some of this part might at some point touch on it. The like commentary part, but the Gemara itself or the Talmud itself, neither Gemara nor
Mhm.
Mishnah, really does. You see here that we are getting some more names. We're getting some more specific arguing. That's when things get spicy, when the rabbis start really like directing their arguments at each other. But it's still a lot of the same, like, what is a day? How do we know? We're talking a lot more about priests, whatever. Okay. So that's the first page, and we can continue on. I want to try to find for next time. Well, it should be early on here, but I don't remember exactly where. But one of the stories of why I think Rabban Gamliel is a weenie comes up here with the Shema stuff. So I wanna find it before, make sure we get to it before we move on. And then I thought, oh, and also very important that demons come up.
I saw that.
The Talmud loves demons. This section doesn't get super into it. There are other parts of Talmud that are more, they have more to say about demons. But like demons have their own set of halakha that they have to follow. I think it's hilarious. Anyway, but I was gonna say I do want to do if it's okay with you, I think it'll be fun to get a little more of brachot done next week, and then to do 2 weeks on something in Yevamot, which is where the Daf Yomi cycle currently is, and you can kind of see, like, I mean, it's not so linear, and obviously we're skipping a huge chunk in between, but like the different scope of things that are discussed in the Talmud.
No, I think that's good. That'll give us a broader picture of what we're dipping our toe into. Yes.
So the only thing is that July 3rd, I also have a baby naming at the synagogue at 1, so we're gonna have to meet a little earlier because it was originally part of our schedule. But I think that'll be fun. Sorry, Terry, go ahead.
Today really gave a good flavor, a sense of the arguments back and forth and the minutia of the words and delving into.
Good.
And thank you for doing this when you are out of town.
Yes.
That's the beauty of Zoom. Yeah, next week I'll have better internet connection.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Right. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a good
Bye.
week.
Bye.